All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Spill the Tea by Scratching Collective. Scratching is a collective created by Horace and Gracie, and they recognize the deep impacts the pandemic has had on young creators in the industry, especially ones that wanted to start out immediately. And so Scratching was created as a platform for emerging artists to share their works and to develop their craft. So Spill the Tea is a weekly event where we invite guests to have a dialogue session about topics related to the arts industry. And today we'll be talking about inclusivity in theater, more specifically on disability-led practice. And we have three great guests with us here today. We have Grace Lee. So Grace founded Access Path Productions in Singapore, which is a social enterprise that champions equal access to the arts. We have Daniela Faircloth. Daniela is an actor and creative who has recently started training at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, where she wishes to further her teaching and outreach skills. And we have Saida Ahmed. Saida is a university graduate who is an alumni at Chicken Shed Theatre and is represented by Global 7 Agency. I'll get you guys to introduce more about yourselves in a bit, but first I just want to talk about the topic we have here today. So our very first session, we talked about creating a safe space in like the rehearsal rooms and audition spaces. And one of our guests, Georgia, she pointed out that you can't talk and address the safe space without also talking about a lot of the intersections of like the many marginalized identities that we have, talking about race, about sexuality, about gender, and everything on the table. So even though today's talk is about disability and disability-led theater practices, I just want to say that we cannot see inclusivity without also looking at all of the other aspects like race, class, gender, even though today's topic will also focus on disability. So feel free to talk about those things as well if you feel like it pertains to the topic. So yeah, maybe we can just get started with everybody just introducing themselves and their work and how they've been involved. So maybe Grace, we can start with you.
All right, I'll go first. So hi everyone, my name is Grace and I'm currently in Singapore. So really my practice started when I decided that I wanted to go to drama school in the UK, and I went to Central and I did my master's in applied theatre. And it was through there where I really broadened my perspective of what is the kind of theatre that I really would like to make. And it was an eye-opening year in terms of just meeting different practitioners and learning about the different kinds of whether it's with the social justice system, whether it's in education, and like you said, all the different intersections. And there were this entire community of global artists, just always talking about what are the ethos and the ethics involved in serving the respective communities that they go into, and eventually build very long, meaningful relationships with these communities and become a part of them. Mm-hmm. So I was fortunate that I went to Grey Eye after I finished my time at Central, and I was the international artist in residence for a year. Learning, and Grey Eye is one of UK and I believe Europe's I would say top leading disability-led theater companies. And that was when I just saw how the pros do it in every aspect, and to be not just supportive, but really championing professional disabled artists and this whole entire ecosystem of presenting disabled talent and disabled experiences. So I knew that that was the kind of work that I wanted to do. And when I went back to Singapore about 3 years ago, I started Access Path Foundations, Access Path Productions, and went from there. So we're like going back 30 years and starting all over again.
Saida?
That's really good, by the way, Grace, because that just like blew my mind and it was really insightful. So thank you. But yeah, just like Grace, I went to Chicken Shed Theatre. I studied there and I did a foundation degree and a BA degree. So, first of all, I wasn't like, although I was disabled, I didn't use words that were very disability friendly, if you get what I mean. But as soon as I started like Chicken Shed, it really blew my mind, and I was like, okay, I must fix myself and the way I speak because it's gonna impact the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean? And it's just the fact that they kept on getting me involved in certain stuff and getting me to act and perform on stage, I became more comfortable within how I do things because they always used to be like, okay, can't can't is a bad word because if you can't do something, that means you won't do it. So don't use the word can't. Just think about how you can adapt while you're on stage. And if you can't adapt, then think about another thing that makes you comfortable to do on stage. And then they'll just pick it up from there. So I think that helped me in having to like that sense of mentality helped me in having to like adapt myself within the industry and now I'm comfortable with how I do things. So yeah.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Saida. Daniela?
So
That's really lovely, and it's really lovely to hear about your training. So I study applied theatre in education. I originally thought that I wanted to be an actor. I spent some years auditioning, thinking that that was what I wanted, but actually applied theatre I'd always done that I didn't realise had a name. I didn't realise it was an actual thing, and I think a lot of people have this. So I'm dyslexic myself, but growing up, my brother has Tourette's and ADHD, and for a couple of years, totally disabled. And he went to a special needs school, and it was through that I became familiar with the special needs school setting, and I really wanted to be a part of it and offer drama because I knew how therapeutic it had been to me. And again, it took me some time to then connect the dots and realize, okay, that's applied theatre. It is a therapy. Like, there are these degrees for a reason. Why are you not experimenting? So a lot of what I do comes from community, wanting to give other people a platform, so that's pretty much me and where I am. I'm networking with a lot of people. I'm doing a lot of work with Access All Areas. But yeah, that's pretty much me.
Cool. Okay, thank you guys so much for introducing yourselves. I wanted to start the conversation off talking about process and disability-led process and what that means. So there are so many different types of disability. It's like such a broad category that there's no like one size fit all template to follow in terms of process. And so even thinking about the social model of disability and how that can be applied to the theater practice and the process, I just wanted to ask all of you about your experiences trying to create that kind of space within the rehearsal room and how to adapt the process based on the needs of different actors and also how your own experience in the rehearsal space. So maybe Grace, you can start us off.
So at Access Path, the foundation of our practice is, of course, like you mentioned, the social model of disability. So actually, we don't look at disability per se. You know, the stories that we tell might be about the politics of disability, but we never focus on one person's impairment or one person's the things that one person can't do. That's not what we're about. So it's always about what is disabling them. So we always ask the question is, what are the barriers here that are preventing an artist from doing his or her best work? So in some cases, it might be, oh, I would need a sign language interpreter in the room so that, to bridge that communicative gap so that I can then therefore go on to do the best work that I can. Sometimes it's a braille machine that's needed, an audio describer. Sometimes it's about, setting rehearsals at a certain time where a person traveling with a guide dog does not have to travel during rush hour. And it won't be he or she will come into a rehearsal fresh, and of course the space has to be accessible. So I've started really with Kate O'Reilly, the playwright who is based in the UK as well. And so for her, it was very clear throughout our collaboration. She has taught me so much that if one of us can get into that space, none of us is getting in. So I guess before we even talk about, the kind of work that we want to do, it's so important to get it right, to ask the right questions, to prepare, to budget, to make sure that the conditions are set in place so that we can actually all gather together and make the work in the best way that we can. So that's how we function at Access Path. Sometimes because in Singapore, we're still very much a charity or a kind of a medical model of disability. So I have actually talented young people coming in and giving me their medical certificates and go like, this is my disability. Can I come work with you? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what to do with this, but tell me what you need. Tell me what you need. Because we're of course, the talent and the ambition must be there. Sometimes we do meet very talented people, but they might not be interested in, the life of a theater practitioner. That's very hard work, right? Or some people might have the ambition, but perhaps the talent is, still in the making. So for us, we're very, very clear that we want to showcase and platform disabled artists telling their own stories and not have others speak for them, and advocate for them to self-advocate, to be the cultural leaders that they can't be. We don't even like the word inclusive. We don't use the word inclusive at Access Path because when you include someone, it suggests that, you're giving permission to allow somebody to come and exist and be part of an experience. Someone is still excluded. So we use the word participation, and it's about what we can all do, pool our resources so that we can all actively participate in this cultural experience that is theater making.
Yeah, definitely. That's so true. I feel like it's very, like, when you are an outsider to it, it can be very easy to forget that this is just that, like, that the person with the disability is not just their disability, and there's so much more than that, and they're just a person, right? Yeah, and like that's how you create that community. So Saida, what about you? What has your experience been like in this like disability-led process, and what does that mean to you?
I feel like because I said I went to Chicken Shed, I studied there. From there, like great things started happening because my mentality started changing. So when I done Miss Burden at the Bunker that was directed by Debbie Hannon and written by a friend of mine, Matilda Ibini, and Debbie and Matilda have been friends of mine for as long as I can remember now after I had done Little Miss Burden, because they're the reason why I have such thick skin now, because they're like, when I was in the rehearsal room and when we used to rehearse, like everybody else, I'll be so hard on myself. I'll be like, oh, but I want to keep up with everybody else. I want to come at the same time like everybody else is coming in. I can't have I can't excuse myself just because I'm disabled. I must do this and this and that. I must work 3 times as hard because, being Black, female, and disabled is not the easiest thing in the industry, let alone society itself. But she just used to tell me, sit me down and be like, listen, you need to stop being so hard on yourself. because you're a great performer. And the only reason why you think you're not is because your energy levels, like, they drop, not like on purpose, but it's just within you because you've got like lack of iron and stuff like that. So you shouldn't beat yourself up about stuff like that because you can't change yourself. You can only be the best person that you're trying to be on stage. And I think as soon as you accept that, you can like persevere in whatever you want to do. And I think that has really, I've really like instilled that in my brain because it's like every time I'm being hard on myself, I remember her. I'm like, oh no, what would Debbie do? What would Debbie say? And she would just use like friendly, disabled words like swizzle instead of like walk on stage because it's like I can't relate to it. You know what I mean? But she used to use relative words that would like inspire me and impact my way of thinking. So I think that was great because without her doing that, I think I wouldn't have you know, have that instilled in me up until now. So yeah, I think she's great.
Oh, wow. So she just was like your mentor in a sense?
Yeah, because I felt like that because I was like, wow, if it wasn't for Debbie, like, and Matilda writing this story, then my mentality wouldn't have developed as as much as it has now because Matilda, she's also disabled, and that story that I starred in alongside Annie Nelson and Shell, Shell, I can't remember their second name, but I think that was like the story in itself was how I felt like within my childhood as a whole. Because I always used to tell myself, oh, you're really bad at doing this because, you know, you can't do it like everybody else. And she like put that so perfectly within her story that it was so hard not to relate to it. I always tell her all the time, it's like, you read my mind and put it on paper. It's crazy. And she's like, well, from now on, I'll be like, you know, by your side, helping you with anything you need. So yeah, she's been great.
Oh, that's great. And like maybe later on we can talk more about Little Miss Burden. Um,
Yeah.
what about you, Daniela?
It's really lovely because there are parallels between both of your answers that I really hold close to practice and previous projects. So straight away when I read the question, I'm just trying to find it. What exactly does it mean for a performance to be disability led? I straight away said, well, are we coming from the standpoint of if we're leading by the fact that we have a disability, or we're leading from the group? And I would always say from the group of artists that you have in the room. You don't have to say people in the room, you have artists in the room. And thinking back to what you just said, I find it really important that we work to the slowest person in the room. Our world is so fast paced constantly.
Yeah.
We have to get here on time, we have to do this on time. We can't always. And if it makes a project more friendly led, then we work to the slowest person in the room, and that is just an etiquette of our, going back to the safe space, an etiquette of our working contract that we have. And I think it's really important to always recognize that the way you work with a group will change every time the people change within the room. Everybody has different needs, everybody has different energy levels. So finding the common, this is the point, that the level that we work at is really important, because actually I found that when you do that, there are some beautiful nuances of performance you would have never had you put the pressure on performers or artists to perform at your level. I'm just trying to think, what was the other thing I was going to say? It slipped my mind. Yeah. So the other thing is, yeah, just approaching your participants as artists as well. because I think it can be quite easy for the just agreeing what the hierarchy is, director and artist. It isn't like I'm a director and I'm going to tell you what to do. It's an empowering of artist and director working collaboratively together and finding that contract, that working harmony that works.
Yeah, that goes back to what Grace was saying about it being like a participative, collaborative process. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering also, yeah.
Sorry, no.
So how, for Grace and Daniela, how do you guys reach out to these talents? Like, how do you find them? How do you cultivate their talents? And how do you like get them into the room? And for Saida, like, what was your experience wanting to get into that room and wanting to be in a theater space and to share your stories? Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I don't want to get the answer wrong.
No. I was just wondering what was your experience like trying to get into the theater space and trying to like tell your stories on stage and to be an actress?
Well, first of all, it is very hard, but I feel like when you find the right people to create with, it can be very easy because you just need open-minded people that are on the same wavelength as you. They don't necessarily have to relate to you physically. They could just be open-minded enough to say, okay, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, let's do this and this and this in order to make this accessible or easier for you. And if you don't like it, just say. And as soon as I got to the bunker, even though there were like obstacles, they weren't really that big of an obstacle, but as soon as I got there, I noticed that the slope was a bit difficult when I had to get in because it was quite slopey, but there were always people there to help, so I would never be like stuck. Do you know what I mean? But if it was that type of environment where people didn't want to help or they weren't willing enough to help, it would have been twice as more like difficult to get in or to participate on stage. And the fact that the stage itself had like ramps and it was like instilled, they actually got pieces of wood, decorated it, painted it, everything, because Debbie was on their necks. Debbie said, listen, the main character is disabled and she will need this and this and this. And if we can't do this on the day, then don't come to me at all. And they managed to really like, pull through. And my two co-stars, Shell and Annie, they were brilliant. They weren't at all like, I didn't feel like I had to compete with them at all. I didn't feel like, oh my God, because they're able-bodied, therefore, I feel some type of way or intimidated by them. They just were so kind and understanding. And it was like, wow, this place is really the place I want to be in. It's just that feeling of family and we're all one is the best feeling ever.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, this is making me miss being around people now. So for Grace and Daniela then, like, how do you guys find these talents?
I think for me, it was really interesting. Access Path truly started because of a UK and Singaporean collaboration. So we were awarded an unlimited commission, an international commission by Unlimited. And it's a UK-based consortium of disability arts groups. And we were So it was a big commission, and we opened the show in Singapore, and then we came back to the UK, opened at the South Bank, and then we toured the UK. This was in 2018, and the show is called "And Suddenly I Disappear: The Singapore and UK monologues." And so to me, it was just, it's like starting with a big bang, having UK artists and Singaporean artists working with each other, and just having this dialogue about diversity, about difference, but in two very, very different places. But yet again, sometimes when you come back to the disability experience, disabled stories, right? It's quite universal as well. So we knew that in this project, which took 2 years of me and my collaborators' lives, from the commission all the way to, I'm touring the show, it was just, it was a baptism of fire with a international cast, with on the spectrum of disability. Everybody had different needs that we had to make sure, and I was producing and performing in the show as well. So on top of doing my job as a performer, I had to make sure that working with other producers, that everything was, people were taken care of. And it was a baptism of fire, just trying to figure out, and you will get it wrong. You will get it wrong. And learn from getting it wrong, and like a few years later now, I'm still getting it wrong, whether is it in terms of language, whether is it in terms of sometimes when you make something accessible for one group, it actually becomes inaccessible for the other. Like I remember one part of the show where we wanted to honor deaf culture, so the performer Ramesh Mayapan had a piece where it was done completely in silence for 10 minutes, and it was visual vernacular he was performing. And then we had vision impaired audience going, "What's happening? It's 10 minutes of silence." And we're like, oh, and that was during the R&D stage, and we take that in, and then we had to grow from there, and we negotiated with Ramesh, and we go like, was it okay to have bits of audio description embedded throughout the process, but done in the most minimal and poetic way? And Kate O'Reilly, the playwright, was like, this is me taking my script and working as I go along. So I think Danella mentioned how, it's such a participant-centered experience, and your adaptation of your process, it changes with the people that come into the space. So sometimes I don't know, is it the universe? Is it people who believe in our work come in and go like, hey, can we try? And we're always go like, yes, come, let's try. Theater making is about taking risks, but the payoff, the rewards can be wonderful. And I feel like, with the new talent that I meet all the time, it's always that risk-taking relationship that's going to begin. And we will mess up, we will apologize and learn from it, and then we try and fail better next time. So at least that's my experience from that.
Amazing. Can I just ask, was Aaron in your project?
Aaron, yes, he was the intern in the project, in the second version of it. Yes, he went to Central, didn't he? Yes, he was lovely.
I'm on his degree. I've read the book. He actually gave it to me to read as part of research for an essay. So that's amazing. I loved it. It was amazing.
Yes, that was a worthy, a worthy risk taking experiment. Truly.
What would I say about? I really stand by the ethos of nothing about us without us, and not speaking for people. So a lot of my projects are based on like just verbal networking and conversations that I've had with people, and then questioning, is there a story that you need to tell here? What's the message that you want? And actually earlier in the week, I was speaking through the questions for this very talk with Liz Alterrett. She used to work at Central, and she co-founded the theatre making diploma course at Central. Yes. And she was saying how so many of our artists are constantly apologizing for being in the room and essentially existing. And it's finding that language and the things that really, when you peel back the layers and you stop and artists stop putting on that disguise, that socially policed identity that has been put upon them, you really find the nuances, the things that people really want to say. And it's through that you find the people that you know, work with for a long time, and you want to take on a journey with you. I sort of going back to what you were saying about always having people, you know, you'll always want to work with her forever now, your mentor. Yeah, I think you find that with artists too, and you hold on to things, pieces of dialogue that you've heard, conversation that leave you sort of changed and impact your work going forward. And it's those mistakes often where you find that, and it leaves you changed, and you never come back from it. You only go forward. You're continuously adapting, but there's never a real truly right or wrong way, because when you're trying to be accessible for everybody, you're always excluding somebody. So it's a constant balancing game.
And I also forgot, sorry, to mention the fact that I worked with Faya May, which she choreographed some of the dance pieces, and she really got me dancing, because I feel really insecure about dancing sometimes. And she's like, don't be silly, just go for it. Like, you know, she's so real with me, and she just, like, if realness had legs, that would be her, because she never once ever lied about anything to me, and she's just so direct and real, and I love that. And the fact that Debbie actually told me, if you go to further auditions and you need, let's say, a scriber, or because I can write, but I can't write as fast as everybody else. So she said, if you ever need a scriber or a book stand, so that you can put your, you know, scripts on there while you read in auditions, you have to do that. So when I went to the Globe and had to perform for the Globe, with something that Matilda wrote as well, I had asked them for a book stand. And when I auditioned at Grey Eye, I asked them for a book stand. And it's just that thing where you just remember things that people have told you. So yeah, I'm very grateful.
I really loved your answers just now, and I think everyone kind of touched on the idea of like storytelling and presenting stories, and writing and creating these stories. And like we actually opened up some questions to our followers on Instagram, and one person actually asked about this. So the question was, how do you prevent the sensationalism behind disability-led performances or practices? So I guess that like goes to kind of like asking, what are some of the ethical considerations to be made when telling and creating these stories, and what kind of stories should be told? Yeah. So Daniela, I think you mentioned something like a quote just now.
Yeah, the nothing about us without us. Yeah. Okay, so that's a really good question, and something I'm really passionate about, actually. I'm really big on like if it is a story of somebody's experience or injustice, I'm really big on approaching people's unconscious bias, because I think there's a lot within that. But you've got to be really careful not to be accusational or bring the audience on a journey so that they're on your side. That, you know, they don't feel like they're being accused, but you approach things gently. But you also don't filter. I think that's really important. We're not filtering here. I think the artists, at least in my experience, have gone through enough where they've been socially policed into being a particular way that they don't want more of that. So it's about empowering, and that process can take a long time for artists to you know, drop the disguise and to actually to realize how much they've hidden parts of them. So I think I mentioned Lizelle Terrett before. She worked on a show called, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, I think so, right?
She worked on
Put
a show.
like a beep on it.
Yeah,
Just
they
in
can
case.
edit that.
In post-production.
She worked on a show called Not Fucking Sorry, basically, and the whole cast were neurodivergent and queer identifying, and it looked at all of the things that they felt members of the public that didn't have a disability didn't understand. That people with disabilities might like to drink and smoke, they might like to have sex, they've got a social life. So I think it's things like that, like it's presenting the human beings that we know exist and are amazing friends and collaborators, and putting that at the forefront of an audience, and addressing that they are unconsciously biased about these things, and it's okay, but we're also going to show you and not filter that.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
a lot of the artists that I work with, there's this spirit of disruption, because when it comes to the mainstream gaze, you have this whole spectrum, no doubt about it. One end, you have the objects of pity. They need handouts. They're so special. They're a burden on society, that sort of thing. And therefore, we need to open our hearts and wallets and donate. I'll call this number on the Teleton and donate £5 or something, right? And with the sad music and all that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the superhuman Paralympian. If I can do this, what's your excuse? Get off your ass, right? And start being your best self. Then you get that, right? But there's everybody in between. And I completely agree with Danella, right? It's about if we're going to be putting all we've got into this platform, the artists need to be the one taking the lead creatively. They need to own their stories, and of course, sometimes I deal with not just I could deal with self-censorship as well, because I'm from Singapore and self-censorship is a big issue over here.
Yeah.
Right? As most people will know. So it's about people not saying what they're feeling or thinking. They police themselves as well. But yeah, on the other hand, I would also have to respect, that sometimes people are not at the point when they are ready to say what is it that they need to say. It doesn't mean that they have nothing to say at all, right? But so it's also about respecting that line. So I'm not going to push, and I'm not going to border on exploitation, because you get that as well. You will get your paternalistic, bleeding heart types of artists, and I've seen it, where they come in and they sensationalize and they market the whole production, with selling disability. I have seen artists with the names of artists bracket this disability, bracket autistic, this name bracket transgender or something like that. And people will then go into that show expecting a freak show.
Totally,
right?
I agree. Yeah.
Yes, and so I think that the ethics, that line has to be so clear that people can say what is it that they want to say, and lead that process. If it's about watching cat videos on YouTube, then so be it. I'm not going to go like, oh, but talk about your struggle, talk about, how you've been abused. No, it's really about respecting the voices and of these complex individuals that are in the same room as me, and giving them the support that they need, but at the end of the day, respecting those boundaries as well.
It's the duty of care. Like,
Absolutely.
I didn't touch on that earlier, but yeah, it's a massive duty of care. Eradicating the need to apologize when they're in the room, but also recognizing that you don't need to explain to yourself. And if you want to empower, you don't need to present yourself as something to pity. It's speak your truth and speak it wise, but also humanize yourself. Pitying yourself isn't a humanizing tool to give. So I think it's something in the language. I'm disabled, but I'm not fucking sorry. Or I'm disabled, come and watch me and I'll tell you how I've been. It's a totally different approach. So it's within the duty of care of the directors and the producers to bite the heart of that message. What route we're going to go down, because it can go down either way. And, you know, if the performer wants to speak, they're going to be guided by the people influencing them. So it's a huge responsibility of care and duty to really honor that and hone into what you really morally you agree with, and you go with that.
Yeah, thank you guys. That's just exactly what I think this question, like that's the exact answer I think this question needs. I think it's a lot of people don't talk about these things, and yeah, thank you for that. Saida, what about you?
I just feel like, first of all, something that Grace said that really stuck out to me, because when I was doing Little Miss Burden, there was a journalist who was sitting right at the front. She had a little coat on, looking like she was about to like leave. So when she left, she then read the the article, and she was like, "Yeah, Saida Ahmed was a lovable character, and but I just feel like the the dance movement and the choreography was somewhat messy, and it was too humorous, and I just feel like when because they're talking about a disabled story, maybe it shouldn't be as humorous. Is basically what she was trying to say. Because disability, there's nothing humorous about us. We just talk about our struggle and then we leave. So when we saw that as a collective, as a group, we was absolutely fuming. Because how dare you, as an able-bodied person, especially police us into displaying a show about disability. It just doesn't make sense, because there was no crying as much. There was no yelling, "Oh my god, why am I like this?" Then you feel like it's not a proper representation. How dare you? You know what I mean? And I was like so angry at the fact that this was publicly on on social media. I was like, wow. Like,
Yeah.
some people don't have the consideration and the empathy to think about what they say would actually impact others. Do you know what I mean? I was so shocked, but I wasn't surprised, because it's like you are gonna get those kind of people in the industry that don't understand at all. And it's not like they don't understand, they don't want to understand.
Yeah.
Which is really ignorant, but
People
you
are
can't.
ignorant. People are
Yeah.
massively ignorant. I find one of the biggest barriers with creating work like this is, how do you make people give a shit that don't want to give a shit? Like, people are privileged. People are privileged, and if they've not ever had to try and understand, then they probably won't. And them thinking that representation of disability has to be full of pity is more of a reflection on them than anyone else. It's their ignorance. It's never yours. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes, as much as we really want to focus on the art, we want to focus on the work, that it comes with a duty of educating the ignorant, about having that conversation, because I try to tell myself that, people don't know what they don't know. And they come into the theater space with privilege. So at Access Pop, what we do is we work with something called the aesthetics of access. So we incorporate signing, the audio description into the performance, but it's not an afterthought. It's not something functional that we just, park a sign language interpreter on stage. It's not like that. It's incorporated into the work. And also the way it's being written, it would be more evocative and more descriptive to someone who is relying on listening to the text. So you get people who come in and go like, oh, the captions, I don't like how you've chosen to describe the background music, or the like smoky grungy beats. I would like to listen to it for myself and then make up my own mind. And I'm like, that is hearing privilege right there.
Yeah, it's not
Mm.
for them. And some
No,
people recognize that.
don't make it about you.
Yeah.
It's not all about me. Oh.
Exactly. But and you know, then or we'll have people who come in and go like, you know, the kind of work that you guys do, it's so unapologetic, it's defiant, and we see ourselves as a bunch of disruptors, you know, when we so the work is unapologetic, and people come in expecting something else, so and perhaps they get a rude shock, or we have members of the deaf and disabled community coming in expecting those same sob stories. Maybe they were expecting a cathartic, let's all sob together, I feel each other kind of experience, and they'll come up and go later and go like, oh, you know, I don't think your work is layered enough. It didn't reflect our struggles. It didn't reflect, you know, our how sad we are, and I'm like, but the mainstream does it already, and they do it so well. So why should we do it here? Right? And this is our space that we've created, and if it's unapologetic, proud voices, it's about disability excellence, it's about disability pride. And this is the space where everyone is on board to participate and contribute and shape it. You know, and I feel so lucky being part of this community, and we're all alike in our thinking and how we support each other and give each other the tools to succeed. And I get that, you know, not everyone is interested in this sort of environment, might not is not interested in understanding it, but we also have allies. We do have allies. We do have people who come to our shows, who meet our artists, and have those, and are interested enough to have those conversations, and then they come back, and then they become a part of us. So, you know, I like to focus on the allies that we gather rather than the people who come in and with their own mainstream gaze and attitudes and go like, oh, that wasn't my cup of tea.
I love it. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things or tools that I've witnessed in one of the shows is throwing back the ableist gaze. How does it feel to have somebody look back on you? Yeah, focusing on the allies is so important. When somebody puts their hands up and says, I didn't realize I thought like that, but that's really interesting, thank you. That's a really, really lovely feeling.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess like this idea of building a community of people who, like as you said, Grace, like go to your shows and they hear these stories, and then they go out and tell these stories to their friends and families, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and like people shouldn't hold you to like an archaic traditional standard that was built on that privilege. Yeah.
And
So
I think about people who are so willing to learn is the moment you start talking about accessibility, about the social model, people actually can't unlearn these things. That's what I realized, you know, when I start pointing out how inaccessible a space is, or how certain words like wheelchair bound. Oh my goodness, every time I get $1 to tell someone that, you know, no one's bound to a wheelchair. It's a mobility aid. It takes you places. You know, and but the thing is, or what the word handicap, we still use handicap here in Singapore. I shudder every time, but people are still using it. And when you tell them, you know, it comes from this medieval root of cap in hand, right? That is the origin of the word, although not really proven, but you know, cap in hand, which means a beggar, right? And when you explain these things to people, those who are, you know, willing to learn and become allies, you can't unlearn these things, and people become so mindful about it. But I guess, you know, that the connection has to be made first.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you guys, and I think this is probably like the last question. What are some of the stories that you've been wanting to tell lately, especially like in this time, and just like what have you been thinking about, like what, anything?
I don't know if it's so much a story that I would like put on stage or put out there, but I've just recently applied to be disability and dyslexia officer at Central, and I found when I was writing my manifesto that the access all areas students didn't know there was a representative for them, essentially, and that they had the right to say who that person was. And that is something that has made me really want to scream from the rooftops. because people shouldn't be put in the dark for political decisions that reflect them. And why like, it's not really a story that I would put out there, but it's just something that's really really got me recently.
I think for me it's Singapore, especially right now, we're going through, we've just we don't call it the lockdown here, we call it the circuit breaker. And and really the reason for it is has been a massive outbreak in the dormitories of our migrant workforce. And these are mainly South Asian men who have left their families, got into pretty hefty amounts of debt in order to pay a middle person to come to Singapore and work long hours doing back-breaking jobs in construction, in industries, and they live in deplorable conditions. It's almost like Singapore, we have a sweatshop right here that is located far from the glitzy touristy parts, the non-crazy rich Asian parts of Singapore. And this pandemic, has revealed a very startling truth of urban alienation, of, in a way, you could say, really exploitative behavior, all in the name of economic progress. And so I think there is that parallel. I see that parallel between these migrant workers and their marginalization, and also the artists, the disabled artists, that the deaf and disabled community that I serve, of segregation, of isolation, of not being prioritized in a society that is all about being on that productivity drain. And we are pushing for that at Access Path. Our work is always to highlight these invisible narratives in Singapore. So definitely there's so much of it. Singapore just seems so glitzy on the surface, and so
easy to cover. Yeah,
it is. It's so easy to cover up and forget about those who fall through the cracks. Yeah. So I think it's so important that we keep elevating, lifting these voices up.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that out. Like, it really kills me every time I see people celebrating low numbers in the community cases, and I'm like, we still have 500 cases every single day. Like,
yeah, they separate the reporting. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's like, oh, there's the dormitory numbers of infected cases, and then the community. So that means that they're not part of our community. They're literally here for us. They're disposable. They're here for us to use them. And I find that just unacceptable.
What about you, Saida?
Well, I'm currently writing a story right now with a narrative about disabled people in, like, what do you call it, meetings, and like let's say if they want to have like something to do, like, or work, so job interviews, right, is what I'm getting at. I had to find that. But yeah, this character, she's in a meeting, she's disabled, but she's got a hidden agenda within herself. She actually works as a journalist, and I'm not going to tell you too much because the story, because when I start off saying stuff, I just tell you the whole story. So I'm gonna stop there. But I'm working on it with Ricky Blair and some other amazing writers, and Matilda, who actually wrote Little Miss Burden, has helped me, structure it, like, in order to make sense. You know what I mean? But she really gave me an insight on how the story could go. So I just want to tell that narrative of, like, disabled people having to go to job interviews and get, like, prejudiced and being asked stupid questions like, how fast did your chair? Because like you said, Danielle, unconscious bias, which I studied with Chicken Shed and is still studying with Chicken Shed in that aspect of things, because we talk about unconscious bias all the time, because people don't realize they're asking stupid questions sometimes until you tell them that was really a stupid, ignorant question. And and I just want to show that and display that in my story that I'm writing at the moment. And hopefully, when it's published, like other people like me who are performers can read it and relate and, you know, and be like, oh, I've been through that. Because I'm my own worst critic, right? Because I want it to resonate with the person that's reading it. And if it doesn't resonate to me, I'm going to be like, okay, that's shit. Let me rewrite that. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Nice. Cool. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I think we have to wrap it up here, but I had a really, really great session. And yeah, there's just so much to take away from this. So for everybody watching, Scratching will summarize and present everything that we've been talking about through like an infographic on our Instagram and other social media pages. So be sure to check that out too. And I just want to thank the three of you so much for joining and like for coming in this, we have 2 different time zones happening. And yeah, things have been pretty crazy recently. So thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us. Thank you
for having
guys.
me.
Thank you. This has been great. So lovely to meet you guys.